One of the best things about David Allen's book, Getting Things Done, is that it gives you a way to keep track of everything you want to do and every good idea people suggest to you. You never need to lose a good idea again, which is great, but might also be its greatest weakness. When I first started implementing Getting Things Done, I began capturing literally every idea that seemed even potentially valuable. Many times on my 25-minute commute home from work, I'd pull into my driveway with 30 new ideas in the voice notes app on my phone. Many of these were 2-minute tasks that I could do right when I was processing those notes during my daily workflow the next day, but other ideas were much larger things that couldn't be done right away or even that week. And so I'd put them on my project lists or at least in upcoming or someday maybe. And at first, this was a lot of fun. It was kind of cool to have all these ideas, and I was able to keep up pretty good for a while. But eventually, I had accumulated a lot of ideas and things to do, and the size of it all was starting to weigh me down. I had even a someday maybe list for someday maybe lists to create. It was a nightmare. My solution? My friend Tim Challies, author of The Next Story, Life and Faith After the Digital Explosion, would flag this as a classic mistake. I turned to technology. I determined that I just needed to find a better way to organize my lists and maybe find a better program to do it with. This worked for a while, but of course, did not work for very long. There was just way too much to possibly do and track for me to keep up with. My next attempt at finding a solution was to comb through every productivity book I had to find a better way of doing things. One day I stacked up 30 books and spent a Sunday afternoon and I think a Monday skimming them as fast as I could for all the best ideas that I could find. Then I created a document integrating these ideas together. That normally works for me, but in this case, it still didn't work. The ultimate solution took a long time to come, but through continued reflection and especially reflecting on Peter Drucker's excellent book, The Effective Executive, I came to see the problem. I wasn't giving enough place to reducing. Now, there are 4 main ways to reduce the amount of things you have to do. Here they are: delegate, eliminate, automate, and defer. Those are the 4 main ways to reduce. Now, interestingly, these 4 practices create the acronym DEAD, D-E-A-D. I didn't really like that when I first noticed that, and so I thought about changing the order in order to avoid it. But I'm keeping it because it can actually help you remember those 4 strategies better. After all, the whole point of these strategies is in some sense to kill from your schedule and lists the things you don't need to be doing. That's what reducing is. Some things have to die or else you will never get anything done. So you need to know how to do each of these steps in the DEAD process. But for reasons of time, we are going to look at just the most important and effective of these: delegation. Here is the biggest thing that you need to know about delegation, and it is often overlooked actually. And it's this: our aim in delegation is not simply to make our own lives better and free up our own time. Rather, it is actually to build up the other person. This is, of course, in line with everything we've seen and talked about the importance of seeing people as at the heart of productivity and having an others-centered perspective where you do everything out of a desire for the welfare of others. This includes delegation. In fact, the scriptures teach that everything we are to do in order to build others up. We read things like in 1 Thessalonians 5, always seek to do good to one another and to everyone, or whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, even delegating, right? Do all for the glory of God. And Paul says elsewhere, do all things for edification, for building each other up. So as we saw earlier, doing something for the glory of God actually involves doing it for the good of others, not just yourself, because that is one of the chief ways God is glorified, and that is what God is like. So living that way accurately reflects God's attributes in the world, which goes back to our mission, which is to accurately reflect or image God to others in the world. So when it comes to delegation, how do we do that? It comes from realizing that we are to delegate in such a way that it will build the other person up, help them grow as a person. It's not just about getting rid of the tasks off your own plate, which is the way delegation is commonly presented. Rather, delegation is, yes, about that, but it's also a way to serve others. As other people are built up through delegation, the capacity of the entire organization actually increases. The organization will be able to do more and do it more effectively because you are delegating in a way that builds people up. This intent behind true delegation, that is to build the other person up, implies something about how we delegate. It implies that most of the time we should practice what is called stewardship delegation rather than gopher delegation. Okay, so what's the difference? In gopher delegation, you hand people specific tasks as they come up, and you are closely involved in supervising how they do them. The other person does not utilize much independent judgment and initiative, but is basically operating in a wait until told context. You have something for them to do and you tell them to do it. Go for this, go for that. That's where the word gopher delegation comes from. And responsibilities for the results and methods lie with you, not them. In this approach, it is not very empowering, so the other person doesn't grow because they don't have to use their judgment and wisdom and insight. They are treated like a gopher, like a tool. Further, managing people like this does not scale. How much time does it take to supervise people in detail and give them their every task? It takes a lot. There's just no way you could delegate to more than a few people with this mode of operation. The way stewardship delegation works is that it delegates the task, or more often an area of responsibility, and then allows the individual to determine their own methods for accomplishing the task. The focus is on achieving the intended results, not on how they are done, as long as they are done in alignment with the overall guidelines and values. The person delegating hands over true responsibility for the task to the person they are delegating to. The person is truly empowered. They truly are now responsible for the task, and you do not micromanage them and manage them in a detailed way. Instead, you maximize their freedom to the greatest possible extent, and therefore they have to use their judgment and they grow as people. Now, how do you delegate in an effective way using stewardship delegation? In the book First Things First by Stephen Covey and Rebecca and Roger Merrill, and they point out there are 5 components of effective stewardship delegation. They are desired results, guidelines, resources, accountability, and consequences. So we'll look briefly at each of these. First, desired results. These are the things that need to be accomplished. They are the what, but not the how. For example, when I call up the local sandwich shop to order a sub, I ask for a number 2 roast beef and tell them my address. I don't tell them how to make it, how to get to my place, or how fast to drive. I specify the what, not the how. The how lies with them. The second component of stewardship delegation is guidelines. Now, note that stewardship delegation is not the same as laissez-faire delegation, just total hands off. You don't simply tell the person what is needed and give no guidelines. There often are parameters that are essential to accomplishing the task well. And sometimes these parameters might actually be mostly your preference, and that can be fine. And also, a lot of times there are pitfalls to avoid. So it is helpful to give people guidelines and point out any wrong turns that they should be aware of. But note, you are giving guidelines, not detailed rules. You aren't determining methods. You are showing the broad parameters that will help them be effective. Number 3, resources. This step is often skipped in delegation. This means you let the other person know what's available to help them with the task, like the budget available, if that's relevant. And if there are other people that are helpful to consult or join with them or work for them in the responsibility. Let people know what resources are at their disposal. The 4th component is accountability. Accountability just means that there needs to be in place something for the overall context of the relationship that brings accountability and rewards results. This means knowing what the standards of performance are and when the regular reviews are. It means you care about whether the person is getting the things done and getting them done well. And this leads to the 5th component, consequences, which means you meet periodically to talk about how things are going and what results are coming about. Again, you don't have to do this for every specific task, but simply as a part of the larger framework of the relationship. This consequences, it would include both good outcomes if the accountability is fulfilled and they are doing well, and also outcomes of what will happen if they aren't accomplishing the results or aren't doing them well. Positive outcomes might include increased responsibility, promotions, financial rewards, natural consequences, and so forth. When it comes to negative consequences, note that those are not, sometimes they are necessary, but those are never to be the chief motivator. A manager should never motivate chiefly from threats or even from rewards, from the rewards and punishment model. Instead, managers should manage from values. That's what really taps into people's spirit and therefore their energies. And that results in engagement. Whereas a focus just on rewards and punishment results chiefly in compliance. And you do not get the best work out of people when they're acting chiefly from compliance. But when they are engaged in their work, you get the best results from them. And actually, they enjoy their work a lot more. And why should work be a miserable place? Part of bringing flourishing to the world is making our workplaces great and fulfilling places to work and be. This notion that it's somehow virtuous for people to dislike their work is totally wrong. Managers have a responsibility to make work fulfilling for people. And when you use stewardship delegation instead of gopher delegation, you are doing that. You are creating an environment where work is more fulfilling and engaging, and people can use their creativity and unleash their potential more. And by doing so, you improve their whole lives. Again, because so much of our life is spent at work. So learn how to manage and manage well. And the place to start would be with stewardship delegation rather than gopher delegation. Another thing you'll see about this model is that the role of the manager changes. The manager is no longer chiefly a boss. Rather, they are a source of help. They are not a detailed supervisor, but rather they are there to assist the person and help clear blocks for them. In one sense, the person delegated to actually becomes the manager because they are now enabled to manage themselves within the context of the agreement. That's how God created us to work, not ultimately to be managed by other people, but to manage ourselves. At root, we are to be self-governing, and the way we lead and manage is to reflect that, because it is to respect the fact that people matter and are in the image of God. And that means respecting their individuality and their freedom. This means also that the person actually is able to evaluate themselves. Rather than evaluation being something that comes from the outside in chiefly, a manager giving critique and recommendations, The person will primarily be evaluating themselves. The manager should, of course, give feedback and evaluation, perhaps every 3 months or every year. But the primary responsibility for evaluation is on the person themselves. And usually that is the most effective. We've all experienced that, where we see our own errors and mistakes and we say, oh, I wish I had done that better. Okay, to do it better next time, I'm going to do it this way. That is far more effective evaluation than someone from the outside coming and giving us these detailed lists, especially if they have a negative attitude. And even as the Apostle Paul says, if we would judge ourselves, we would not be judged by the Lord in Corinthians. So the Bible even affirms a significant place for evaluating ourselves and self-correcting. Now, it is true that delegation means that some things will be done less effectively at first because there is a learning curve people have to go through. There is a higher upfront time investment when you delegate. It's true. And that is a big reason a lot of times we don't delegate to the extent we should. But what I want to say to you is it is worth it, because the aim, again, is not just efficiency, but building up people. And because this increases capacity for the long term, delegating is always both more effective and efficient over the long term. So this is perhaps the chief way to free up time and do more. It's to reduce by delegating, and not just delegating in any way, but delegating using stewardship delegation rather than gopher delegation. If you start doing this, you will see your workplace become more empowering and fulfilling, and it will have less stress and lots more will be getting done.